There's a moment it's barely noticeable sometimes, that comes right between what happens to us and how we choose to respond. And most of us miss that moment. We lunge forward, we defend, we explain, we spiral. But what if that peace that we crave, the relationships that we want, even that clarity that we can't quite reach, is all in that moment? It all begins in that brief pause. I'm Dr. Alan Johnson, and on this channel, I talk about the mind, well being, productivity, and change for thinkers, makers, and everyone in between. And today, I want to talk more about how we can learn to pause before reacting and why that really tiny, minuscule moment between some sort of stimulus and our response holds that real key to our spiritual maturity and to our happiness. It's not about some sort of massive change. This is actually something that is small and achievable, a change that we can begin to make today. And here's what we'll explore in this video. First of all, we'll talk about why that instantaneous reactivity is a symptom of our sense of separation, our sense of separateness from everything and everyone around us. And then I'll talk about how that moment of pause between stimulus and reaction really powerfully reconnects us to choice and how we are in choice after the moment of the stimulus. And then I'll share with you a number of simple but really powerful practices to help you develop that sort of pause muscle. It might seem difficult at first, but stay to the end because I have a number of tips and tools to help you do that. So let's begin. I'm going to start really here with a confession, because I used to think that I was pretty calm. I had studied mindfulness for a long time. I had read all the books. I had done all the retreats. I had done all of the journaling, all of the contemplative practices, all of the coaching and therapy. And then it was one Monday morning. It was during a Teams call at work, and someone interrupted me mid-sentence. And without me even noticing, I felt this sense of heat rising in my chest. I'm sure that you've had this type of experience before. It was that physiological response in my body. I didn't shout, I didn't lose it, but my body began to defend. My body created a stress response that seemed to be out of my conscious control. And that upset me a little bit, because even though I wasn't outwardly negatively or adversely reacting to that person interrupting me, my body was doing it for me. Just enough for me to notice, and just quickly enough for me to feel like I had lost control. And that moment, that heat rising in me, that sense of anxiety and worry and upset, it was not about what was being said. It was not about that person who interrupted me. It was about my ego's need to reestablish itself, my ego's need to be seen, to be right. And in that flash, in that moment, I was no longer connected to the shared field, the shared community in which I was present. I instead was trying to win. And here's the thing. This is why I realized this was problematic. That form of reactivity is a symptom of our belief of separation and our belief that we are separate from everyone and everything around us. It's what happens when we forget that we're not here to battle with everyone else. We are here to belong. And that sense of reactivity, that instantaneous flushing of the face, that worry, stress, that desire to physically act out or to respond in an aggressive manner, comes from old grooves that we have worn down throughout our life, old unconscious scripts in our nervous system telling us that you're not safe, or you're not enough, or you are losing control. So when something unpleasant happens to us, those old scripts, well, they jump into action, and they try to get us to reestablish our control. In A Course in Miracles, there's a phrase that captures this really well. You can choose peace instead of this. I really love that. You can choose peace instead of this. And that's what that pause is between stimulus and reaction. That pause is a return to your capacity to choose. Your capacity to choose your thoughts, your capacity to choose your outward behaviors, and with practice, your ability to choose your internal states as well. Now, I'm going to make it really clear that this pause isn't passive. It's not about being silent while you are quietly seething inside. And in fact, that's exactly what I was doing in the Teams meeting on that Monday morning. I wasn't outwardly responding, but I felt it inside of me. I felt unpleasant. I felt uncomfortable. I felt stress. I felt worried. And that was my body's way of supposedly punishing the person who interrupted me. Do you see the problem there? We make ourselves feel bad in a really strange attempt to try to punish someone else. So this pause that I'm talking about and training up the pause muscle, it's not passive. It's not about just being silent, just grinning and bearing it while we are quietly angry and holding on to our rage. Instead, it's an active moment of reconnection and a movement away from our belief in separateness. It is our movement from a space of ego to a place of our true self. It's not about pushing that feeling away. Okay, so if you get bad news, whether a friend calls you and says that your plans have been canceled, whether you get news from a doctor of a diagnosis that's going to change your life or the life of someone else, whether your work circumstances have changed in a way that frightens or upsets you. It is not about denying, repressing, or pushing away those thoughts. Because Freud taught us, and I think that we probably all have plenty of evidence from our own lives, that when we try to push something away, it has even more power and control over us because we no longer have conscious control and awareness of it. So I'm not talking about pushing these things away. I'm about noticing that moment between that bad news, that disappointment, that upset, that worry, that concern, having that brief moment to observe what remains within your control now. What am I believing right now? Is this response coming from fear or love? It's not about going for that dopamine hit of, shouting at the bearer of bad news or trying to reassert your control over the situation. That is not going to help anything. When you pause to observe what remains within your own control in the moment, you're not suppressing the truth, you're not suppressing the outward action, you're just choosing to respond to it from a different level of consciousness. And let's talk now about burnout, because I think that we probably all feel really burnt out in our personal lives, in our work lives, in our love lives. Where does that burnout come from? It comes from our reactivity to situations. That burnout comes from our nervous system jumping into fight or flight mode. And the more we stay in that fight or flight mode, we increasingly feel more and more disconnected from ourselves, from others, and from the world around us. So do you see then what begins as a belief that we are separate from all others, that we can somehow punish ourselves to somehow punish someone who we believe wronged us, then intensifies that belief of disconnection and separateness. Pausing and noticing what is in control in that moment is the only way back. It's not a fix-all. It's not going to get rid of the bad news and disappointments in your life, but it is a doorway through which you can pass to a more spiritually mature outcome. You begin to notice that you don't have to reply instantly. You don't have to match someone else's speed or tone. You can feel something without being consumed by it. And over time, a real shift happens. Over time, you move from a life lived in response to everything outside of you that feels out of your control to a life that now lives like you are in relation to everyone else. So, what does this actually look like in practice? There's a simple 3-step process that I use, both with myself and that I teach to my students, that the more we practice, the more natural it becomes. So, first of all, number one, we need to be able to notice that spike in our mood, that spike, that tension in our internal space. Because before you're able to find the moment of pause, you have to catch that you are activated. Sometimes we call this being triggered or activated, and oftentimes it is physical. It's a tight jaw or raised shoulders or racing thoughts. We need to begin to notice when that occurs. And we need to notice it consciously. So we can simply note it in our minds. I am feeling activated right now. Consciously noting it already takes a little bit of heat and fire out of it and enables us to move to the next stage, which is when we ground the body. Okay, so we notice that we are feeling activated. We notice that a situation external to us is not something that we would desire. So we now ground the body. We can place our feet flat on the floor. We can drop our attention into our breath. This is not about closing our eyes and meditating. It's simply about noticing and then feeling like we've landed in the present moment. This can be challenging. A way that we can begin to develop this ability to ground the body is practicing it before something bad happens to us, before we get the bad news. And a way that I like to teach this to students is every time we stand up from a chair or sofa or couch or whatever it is, and every time we sit down, we mentally note it in our mind. So if I were to stand up now, I'd say standing up from my chair. When I come back and sit down, or if I go into the room and sit down there, I would note sit down on the chair. We do that as many times as we can throughout the day, and it becomes natural over time. This begins to build up that noticing muscle and that grounding muscle. Just doing this in those moments of heightened tension or when we receive bad news is incredibly useful, and it's already going to begin to remove some of the sting now. Then we ask ourselves the question, what is in my control now? There will be lots of stuff that is out of our control. That disappointing news, that diagnosis, that new project, the outcomes of something that we have been working hard on. These things are now entirely out of our control. They may once have been in our control, but they no longer are. But you know what? There are going to be things that remain within our control in that moment. It might be something such as the words that we say next, our next action, how we process that news, how we share that disappointment with someone else, or how we can allow ourselves to feel that disappointment without over identifying with it. So we begin to notice when we feel activated, we ground ourselves, putting our feet on the floor, taking a deep breath, and asking ourselves what remains within our control in this moment. That pause is really small, but it is vital, and it will change your whole life. Not overnight, not in some sort of big blaze of revelation, but slowly and subtly. As we begin to observe between a piece of news, a disappointment, a stimulus, and then our response to it, we respond differently to the world. And that's what we're practicing here. It's not about perfection. It's just about presence. So let me know in the comments before if this has worked for you, and let me know what problems or difficulties you have in finding that space between a stimulus and a response, because this is a challenge. But training our mental muscles to observe that small sacred pause will have huge benefits for us the more and more we practice. I'll see you next time.